go ahead.
Thank you very much, Stefan, and good morning, everybody. I will start saying that, here we are again at the crossroad where the United Nations and its partner has to reset their operations. You might have seen that the latest information from Gaza with an evacuation order that has impacted a third of the strip, 117 square kilometers. Much less impactful in terms of the people because, of course, unfortunately, people are already concentrated in other areas. And some of the areas covered by the evacuation orders are indeed have been already either subject to previous evacuation order or fighting that has happened in the previous months. So the population has already left. But what we saw the last 2 days, since Monday afternoon when the evacuation order was issued, we have seen a constant flow of people moving out. We estimated up to 250,000 people could be affected by this evacuation order, but we are trying to, monitor, and it's very difficult for us to be on the ground in all places, trying to monitor the different patterns and be more precise in terms of the number of people that currently are moving. And that leads me to the point on the overall situation of and the numbers around populations that we wanted to brief you about today. At the moment, we estimate that 9 of every 10 people in Gaza Strip have been internally displaced at least once, if not up to 10 times, unfortunately, since October. I was speaking with colleagues that we have recently recruited to scale up our operations, and they were telling me themselves that they have been with their family moving 9, 10 times, a few times in the north, a few times in Khan Yunis, then go back to Rafah, now up again to Khan Yunis and Derbala. So it's a constant movement. We were looking at the projections of the overall population data that the Palestinian Center of Statistics, Bureau of Statistics is publishing based on the natural growth of the population in Gaza. And that was situating the overall population in Gaza at 2.3 million people, roughly. It's a bit less than 2.3 in reality. Then we thought that now 9 months into this in this crisis, we had to look into some numbers that are the only safe numbers and known numbers that we have. That includes the 110,000 people that have been able to exit Gaza, according to the Border Authority, and the recordings of those movements since October. We also have to take into account the 37,000 people that have been killed, more than 37,000 people that have been killed according to the Ministry of Health. And so based on these two fundamental data, in consultation with the partners in Gaza, and for the sole purpose of humanitarian programming, so it doesn't preclude the ability and the possibility and the day in which those who have left Gaza will possibly come back into Gaza. But just for our programming purposes as humanitarian community, we estimate that the population present in Gaza comprises about 2.1 million people. And we have said since the beginning of the war that basically all of them, unfortunately, are in need of assistance. Out of the current Gaza population, we also estimate that 1.9 million are internally displaced, multiple times. So, for example, the patterns of movement that we have registered in the last 2 days, they are not necessarily adding to this number because some of those, or many of those, were already displaced. And then they moved in different areas, and now they are moving again, trying to find a safe space, if there is any of such. Before we were estimating 1.7, but remember since that number, we had the Operation Rafah. So we had additional displacement from Rafah, and Rafah was not one of the areas that originally was displaced, so the residents of Rafah. And then we had also operations in the north that has also moved people, particularly the Jabalia area, and then in recent days also the Sujahia area, where we had new displacement, but again, those were people that were already displaced in the past, and they have been moving back and forth into their areas. And just to be very clear, this is not the result of a census or a survey. This just represents the sort of a dynamic estimate that we produce based on several sources, including internet usage, mobile phone usage, and trying also to cross-check with colleagues on the ground when this is possible. But beyond these numbers, there are people, of course, men, women, boys, and girls, doctors, students, cooks, artists, journalists, teachers, moms, dads, and people that have fears and grievances, and they had probably dreams and hopes. The less and less I fear today, unfortunately. People who in the last 9 months have been moved around like pawns in a board game, forced from one location to the next location, to the next location, to the next location, irrespective of our ability of support them, and irrespective of the availability of services wherever they land. They've been forced to move because of the patterns of the war. Heavy fighting that has, of course, impacted them whenever they took the risk to stay where their houses were, or where their tents and huts and makeshift shelter was built up. And they move in an overcrowded area. What we're seeing, unfortunately, is patterns that more and more resemble and go back to the originally identified area where the government of Israel and the IDF told us that they want to concentrate all the people. And that's what the patterns that we consistently see unfolding in front of our eyes. With some people remaining in the north, out of this 2.1 million people, we estimated 350,000 are in the north, and those cannot come to the south. The strip is completely broken in two as of today. There are military presence that is blocking movements and impeding movements for the civilians, and frequently, unfortunately, also obstructing our ability to move. These people have been forced to completely reset their lives over and over again. I was talking with some people that moved again after the Rafah operation, and they were telling me, it's very difficult for us to, over and over again, restart the learning of where we are and how we can access basic services. After a while in this makeshift shelter or tents that they had, they figure out where the food could be found, where the water could be found, where the potable water could be found, where the medical point was. And they start getting acquainted with their neighbors if they don't have the family with them. And that is, stripped apart again and again and again. And people have to reinvent and their ability to cope with conditions of lives that are beyond imaginable. In the recent days, we've seen displaced people moving once again from places like Sujahia, for example. And even the so-called or the unilaterally declared zone has been targeted by military operations and forcing people again to leave the areas. Many UN offices and NGO offices were along the Mawasi area in Rafah, so in the south, in front of the sea. And people look at us as a parameter or barometer of the situations, and if they see that we move out from those areas. They fear that something is happening. What we've seen is the Rafah operation progressively move toward the sea and progressively approach the safe zone, again, the unilaterally declared safe zone, and fighting has been happening there. And of course, this is scaring people out, and many have packed the little belongings that they had to move. Others look at us and see if we're still there. It means that they maybe are safe staying there. We calculate that around our area there were probably 80,000 people, and colleagues were telling me that they were estimating that 20%, 25% of the people around our offices have been moving, while others are still hanging in there because they know that there is not much space to move to. This war has also been and continues to be characterized by several obstructions. Of course, it continued generating more pain and suffering and more humanitarian needs. You know, people need water, food, shelter, healthcare, hygiene, protection, and we struggle to deliver this. There has been in the recent days our USG, as Mr. Griffith has repeated again, we are there to stay and deliver and to help people. But delivering for us is a daily struggle. Literally, we have to make gigantic efforts to sustain some lifelining of our services. The delivery of fuel. One thing, fuel is, why would that be so important? But fuel allows hospitals to continue providing services, life-saving, life-sustaining services in hospitals. Fuel allows water to be desalinized and provide basically drinking water to people. Fuel allows us to move food around and bring to the multiple number of NGOs that are cooking in tequilas and offering food and meals to people that is desperate in need. Just like the displaced people, our humanitarian operation was subject to continuously reset. Before the war, our humanitarian hub was in Gaza City, in the north. Then you might remember the night between the 11th and 12th of October, in the middle of the night, the Israeli Authority ordered us to abandon those facilities and move south. We had to comply to protect the lives of our staff, leaving behind warehouse supplies, vehicles, equipment, and bring with us whatever we could, grabbing those things, in between bombardment that was unfolding all around. We left with a feeling of guilt because we knew that we were leaving behind civilians. And since then, we have been quite determined to, not being pushed every time by the conditions to move, unless really the safety comes into line. And in that case, of course, we have to make sure that our colleagues stay safe. But we really need to draw a line of enough for the people, enough for this war that keeps on tearing apart the life of people. We were forced to reestablish our entire humanitarian mechanism from scratch in the south, identify new facilities, finding new staff, or helping our colleagues to come back to work because they were all traumatized, all had lost their homes, many have lost their family members, and it was a difficult journey. And we did it. But then again, was the part of the operation at some point were based on Khan Yunis and then Rafah, and then Khan Yunis operation came in. And again, we had to reinvent our footprint and our operations. And today, our hub was in Rafah. Again, is gone. And they're, the military operation are pushing again and flipping again completely the table. In the last weeks, we have been discussing a lot with the Israeli and the humanitarian community how to resume our ability to bring assistance in from Khan Abu Salem, so inside Gaza, and distribute throughout the Strip. And we have been engineering a lot of solutions and trying and testing, improving and failing at times. And now with this evacuation order, all this has been again wiped out. By the way, as of yesterday, with the Monday evacuation order, the Gaza European hospital has been impacted. Yesterday, we were busy in evacuating the patients remaining in the Gaza hospitals. But in the meantime, many, including patients, doctors, nurses, staff, have left already on Monday. And then late in the evening, the Israelis said, but we did not intend to evacuate the hospital or ask the evacuation of the hospitals. But first of all, they didn't tell us, they didn't communicate this to people. But then when they told us, people have the memories of what has happened in Shifa, in Nasser, in other hospitals, where, doctors and patients and nurses were, once the hospital was invaded by the IDF, they were arrested, interrogated. Some of them then were found days after into mass graves. So people is fear. The fear is dominant, and so people have left. And with the loss of the European Gaza Hospital, we lost one of the last hospitals that has some fundamental services. It had the last CT scan available, fully functioning, was in that hospital. This is gone. Will we be able to reestablish somewhere something similar? I hope so. But again, we have to restart, and we have to, in a very challenging environment. Some of the concrete other obstructions that I think is important to mention. Electricity and fuel. Israeli authority, if you remember, they cut off electricity in October. And since then, of course, there has not been electricity. So electricity is fundamentally provided and solely provided by either solar panels, but that works only during the day because there are not many batteries left, or fuel through generators. But fuel import, as you remember also, has been initially banned and now heavily controlled. But even to import that, we need a functioning Kerem Shalom, Khan Abu Salem, and an ability to bring the fuel where it is needed. It's just not to let him in. It's also allowing this fuel to be distributed where it is needed. Without power, water becomes scarce, bakeries cannot operate, baby incubators are turned off in hospitals, and ambulances remain grounded. Not to mention the fact that many ambulances, unfortunately, have been hit during this 9 months of war. Safety and access has been always a concern for us, for our staff, for our personnel, and for the civilians that are caught in the fighting. Nowhere and no one is safe in Gaza. We keep on saying this. We have seen over and over, military operation and bombardment happening also in the heart of the humanitarian safe zone unilaterally declared by Israel. 274 workers and volunteers, our colleagues, my colleagues, have been killed so far. And many of them were killed on duty. Others were killed at home with their families and their family members. They risk their life every day. And there is no humanitarian installation that has been, or very rare humanitarian installation that have been spared when the front line moves. So despite our effort of notifying those locations, the reality of the battle on the ground that it is frequently those places are hit. You have seen the incidents affecting WFP, UNRWA many times, and other NGO colleagues and other NGO entities. The insecurity of humanitarian workers is closely related to and unfortunately accompanied by those campaigns that call aid organization to question for inability to deliver. We have a dialogue with Israeli daily. literally multiple times a day, actually. And we explain our challenges. We try to find solutions. We work out, understanding that, of course, war is war, and it might have his logic and his objectives. But humanitarian assistance is an obligation that all the parties have to respect, Israeli and other armed groups. And we keep on calling them all to help us to deliver the assistance that is so dearly needed, desperately needed to Palestinians. Humanitarian locations and movement are of course an effort. We do a lot of effort to notify to the fighting parties in order to protect them, but also protect our colleagues, but also because it's a way for the parties to fulfill their obligations. Our role is helping the parties to fulfill their obligations. And so I really hope that we can, continue this dialogue, building more trust among the parties, in order to be able to serve people, because the condition of people are degrading day by day. You have seen the recent integrated phase classification that is, fundamentally telling us that 96% of the population in Gaza, 96%, is from emergency food insecurity or catastrophic food insecurity status. This is simply unacceptable. We need to move the dial on this. And this is not only about bringing food. It is about health. It is about water. It is about sanitation. We have a growing problem of sanitation. We cannot pick up garbage and bring it to the landfill because the landfill are not accessible. And we keep on insisting day in, day out. Finally, the last point, and I wrap up. We have made an appeal for 3.4 billion for the response in Gaza. As of now, we have only 35% covered. And you might tell me, but you're describing so many challenges to deliver, so why would you appeal for more money? The reality is that if we will be able to reach the situation where a ceasefire will be called, or even a pause, we will not be able to scale up our operation to the level necessary unless those resources are mobilized. So it is absolutely important to invest and mobilize those resources now to make sure that when this will happen, we'll be able to scale up. And in the meantime, we'll spare no effort day in, day out to increase our ability to deliver, stay and remain and protect civilians. Thank you for the time you have given.
Thank you very much. Edie?
Thank you, Andrea. On behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association for doing this briefing, my name is Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. A couple of follow-up questions. For the people moving out of Khan Yunis, do you have any numbers of how many have actually left and where are they going? And secondly, Sigrid Kaag said yesterday that one of the key issues is for the delivery of aid within Gaza is deconfliction. Are you making any progress on deconfliction with the Israelis? And can you give us an update on what actually is getting through within Gaza and how important criminality remains? Thank you.
Go ahead,
one step?
Yeah, go ahead,
Okay.
please. Thank you.
Yeah. So people moving from Khan Yunis, first of all, is the eastern part of Khan Yunis is affected, and there is then some areas next to the city center that, again, have been receiving evacuation orders. As I said, because of all the patterns of multiple displacement, it's very difficult to have a precise number about those areas. We estimated, based on the latest analysis done, that in all the areas, so the entire eastern part of Khan Yunis and Derbala and Rafah, we were estimating 250,000 people. We will need to go back on the ground and check, how many of those have first moved and where they are going. Where they are going, basically, they are going in the Mawasi area of Khan Yunis and Derbala. So they are going toward the sea, which is an absolutely overcrowded area, first of all, with very, very limited services. There is no water, not enough water, not enough. There are no toilets there, and even bringing food there is a major challenge for us. It is true that the deconfliction, actually, we call it the humanitarian notification system, because the deconfliction is the way that the military adapt and respond and manage those information. So the humanitarian notification system in se works. What is not working is the deconfliction element, because we have seen over and over again situations where areas premises that were supposed to be deconflicted were not deconflicted at the end and have been hit. At times by ricochet or a straight bullet, but at times they were targeted. The recent incident, for example, in early, I think it was early May, that impacted the WFP twice in two different locations in a matter of a few days. Their warehouses in Khan Yunis and Derbala got hit. So it is really important. I know that our colleagues from the UNDSS are engaging a dialogue with the Israeli authorities just to make sure that we strengthen further the mechanisms. I think that there has been always a dialogue, and then there is the will to move a little bit the dial on that. But what is important is that it trickles down in terms of concrete action on the ground, and I'm looking forward to it. And what is coming in? So at the moment we bring in material from Zikim, so it's Eretz West. That's an important piece of the operation because it's primarily allowing us to meet the basic needs in the north. In the south, in the last 4 weeks, it has been very problematic, and partially, as you alluded to, is because of the internal criminality and linked to the smuggling of cigarettes. And that has become a little bit the biggest challenge we had. We tried to find logistical solutions, but you understand that the real problem is a political problem. There is no logistical solution to a political problem, which resonates with the lack of law and order. And that's something that the parties have to be engaged further. Thank you.
Thank you. Maggie, then Mike, then Michelle.
Andrea, it's Margaret Bashir with VOA. Thank you so much for sharing your precious time with us today. Just some more follow-ups, please. Al-Mawasi, how many people can it feasibly accommodate in that area, and how many do you estimate are there? You gave a figure of 80,000, but I'm not quite sure if that's Al-Mawasi or not. And then the people who are moving from the new evacuation zones towards the coast, are the IDF on those roads? Are we seeing people being detained or arrested, men being pulled out of those groups of families that are moving? Because we've seen that in previous evacuations, so I just wanted to find out what's going on with this one. And are the humanitarians present on the road to hand out water, to give out high-energy biscuits, to assist people that are on the move? Thank you.
So, the Mawasi area that I was referring at is the Mawasi area in Rafah. So it's really the southern, north-southern part, and that's where we were estimating that we had 80,000 remaining people. The Mawasi area expand into Khan Yunis and Derbala, and that's the area where as I said earlier, the original intentions declared by the government of Israel was to concentrate all the civilian population and consider that a safe area. Now, two elements. I think that in the south now we estimate roughly, given the numbers that I gave you before, that around 1.8 million people are in the southern part. And the majority of those today are concentrated in Derbala city and the Mawasi area. Now, it's very difficult for me to tell you how many are exactly in the Mawasi area as per the definition of the Israeli. What I can tell you is that it's by far overcrowded. There is no moment in the day where you can drive through that area or move in that area without finding thousands and thousands of people that are on the streets, and there are a lot of small activities going on. There is markets mushrooming, trying to sell the little things that enter into the street, but is by far overwhelmed and most importantly lack the basic services. We did not see yet ground troops on the ground. We had the likes that you were referring at it before, because the episode you had in mind where when the troops were already on the ground, at least in the area that has been object of the evacuation order issue on Monday afternoon. Where we saw troops on the ground was in the southern part of Mawasi, in Rafah Mawasi, and is part of the Rafah operations. We have not been witnessing any kind of checkpoint because, or situations where men have been separated from women and screened and like that. That has not, to my knowledge, been reported because it was more an engagement with the militants on the ground in the same area, and was tit for tat and battle fought between those groups.
Thank you. Mike, and then Michelle.
Thanks, Steph. Thank you, sir, for doing this briefing. It's appreciated. I wanted to clarify, you said toward the top that approximately 110,000 Gazans have exited the enclave. Can you give a little bit more detail as to by what method they've done so, where they've gone, for what specific reasons they were able to get out? And on a broader note, forgive me if I'm wrong, I hadn't heard Hamas mentioned as of yet. There's obviously this huge argument going on as to whose responsibility falls under, whose purview. Where does Israel's responsibility in terms of the deliverance of humanitarian aid end, and where does Hamas's begin? Can you kind of clarify where that line is? Thank you.
You're muted.
Sorry. The 110,000 are Gazawi that have left the Strip basically since end of October, beginning of November, until the Rafah operation has started in early May, in the 7th of. Some, if you remember at the beginning, the exit was there were still authorities at the crossing, and so there was not clarity about the methods to cross, if they were paying or not, basically. And then the more and more there has been a movement of people that has been basically paying out their way. There was a facilitated, there wasn't a company that was facilitating these exits. And this number, as I said, have been reported by the crossing authorities, combining the information with the Egyptian side. So where their whereabouts, some have remained in Egypt and some have left Egypt. It's not my office responsibility and prerogative to follow that flows, and so I cannot tell you exactly how they've been moving and how many are remaining in Egypt. If you have listened to me with the Hamas question, if you have listened to me carefully, I am always saying the parties because I think that all the parties have a responsibility to meet the fundamental responsibility of protecting civilians. Of course, the parties have not the same. That you cannot equate them. The strength and the means of the forces on the ground are very different. But of course, both contributed to the suffering and the pain we have seen on the ground, and we constantly call them all to meet their responsibilities. That includes, for example, not using inappropriately any civilian infrastructure, particularly hospitals. That is a very debated question. The point is that we have never been able to establish with independent staff or personnel of the UN the claims of the one or the other party. So, I don't really know. I can tell you if they have been misused in hospitals or not. What I know is that the result of it has always been impacting hospitals, which by now are, I think we have, as of today, 20 hospitals that are not functioning out of 36, and the remaining one are partially functioning and barely receiving what they need. Over.
Thank you. Michelle, then Issam.
Thanks, Andrea. Michelle Nichols from Reuters. A quick follow-up on, you mentioned how there'd been a lot of discussions over the past few weeks on how to better improve the delivery of aid from Kerem Shalom into Gaza, and how that's all been wiped out now with this new evacuation order. Can you just explain that a little bit more to us? Is that because warehouses are in the evacuation order, you can't reach the people because they've now moved? If you could just explain that. And then Rafah is still closed. What options are being discussed for the possible reopening of Rafah? And then there is a report this morning that the UN's discussing with Israel the possible use of Starlink in Gaza. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but maybe you could tell us how Starlink might be of use for aid operations in Gaza. Thanks.
Thank you, Michelle. So, Khan Yunis, if you remember, Kerem Shalom, if you remember, until the operation in Rafah started, the backbone of our humanitarian operation was an entry of commodities from Egypt into Kerem Shalom, the scanning, drop off in Kerem Abu Salem, and then we could pick them up, bring them to Rafah where we had our log base, and from there dispatching further throughout the Gaza Strip. When the military operation started in Rafah, of course, we lost the ability to use those areas. We used them we used the area more or less as a corridor, actually, only for a week, and then an alternate road was built by the Israeli in order to make sure that we could continue to operate the Kerem Abu Salem north of the airport. And so the road cuts north of the airport and intercept the Salahaddin Street. The problem is that with the operation in Rafah, we lost our warehouses, we lost our fuel storage, and we lost our ability to, transload the aid that is coming from Kerem Abu Salem and then dispatch it further. So we tried to find solutions, and we explore alternate roads. We explore different options to move to the north and to the middle area, and find alternative locations where we could drop the material, the commodities, the aid, pick it up from Kerem Abu Salem, drop it close, and then from there, so being able to back and forth quickly in order to use all the material that has been dropped in Kerem Abu Salem, and then from there dispatch further. The evacuation order, is covering all the areas where all this alternate roads, alternate warehousing capacity, transloading, new locations for us to start the operation were planned to be. And we were working literally until Monday. We were working on it. Now we have to see what is the implication, the impact on those. I hope that we can find an agreement that those areas will be protected and not, hit by the military operation that could unfold in the coming hours, and then possibly restart our humanitarian operations. We have no problem to operate whoever is in control of the area, as long as we have guarantees of safety and security. On the communication equipment has been a long-standing request of the humanitarian community as a whole. We do it on behalf of our entire community, so including our partners. And it is very simple. Every time there is a military operation, we lose completely communication with our teams. You know very well, and you see me now, the internet and connectivity is fundamental to the way we operate and function in these days. And also the simple phone connections are fundamental. So when there are military operations, frequently the coverage of mobile phone goes down, hence we need alternative ways to communicate with our teams in order to organize the day-to-day operations. Yesterday night, I was until 11 o'clock talking to the team to reorganize our plan for today because we were forced to replan the entire day for the unfolding events on the ground. And, unless I can communicate with my team, I cannot do the coordination essential between them, all the partners on the ground, and the military, the Israeli military, to make sure that they can safely do this operation. So would it be Starlink, would it be another technology? I don't really care, as long as we have what we need to communicate safely with our teams for safety and for operations.
Thank you. Ibtisam.
And there was just options for reopening Rafah.
Sorry, I was hoping to dodge it.
Nice try.
So we have always said that for us it's important the reopening of Rafah, particularly for the private sector. We have always been saying that the private sector is equally important as the humanitarian operations. So we have to prioritize humanitarian aid because I think we have the ability and the interest to prioritize the most needy people, and we are not only looking for the commercial aspect of our. Actually, we have not commercial interest on that. But we need to be complemented with private sector. So we have always said that the Rafah is fundamental. Again, it's a political issue, and it is something that I guess Israel and Egypt have to negotiate and find an acceptable arrangement that will fulfill the mutual requirements and the mutual red lines, security on the one hand and respect of the Egyptian sovereignty on the other hand. So I think that this is a delicate balance that has to be found among the member states.
Thank you. Ibtisam.
Thank you. My name is Ibtisam Azim, Al Arabi Al Jadid newspaper. I have first a few follow-ups. First one regarding your work or coordination with the mechanism under Sigrid Kaag, if you could explain this to us. And the second thing is regarding, I know that, and you have said that, and others many times, that trucks numbers are not enough and the aid is more complicated. But if you could give us a percentage or something that we can have a better understanding of what you, in general, in average, would need daily and how much percentage of that is allowed, let's say, in the month of June or lately. And then another follow-up about the issue of so-called dual usage things. I mean, the Israelis are not allowed, among the few things that they are allowing, there are things that they are not allowing under the so-called dual usage. And some of these things are very essential to your work and aid and to people there. So if you could give us examples. And my latest question, it's a big picture question. You worked in many other areas and in war zones, and if you compare what you are seeing now in Gaza to other places you worked in, how would you describe it? Thank you.
Thank you, Ibtisam. So we collaborate, of course, with the USG CAG operations, Colleagues actually of their office are sitting next to me in my same office. Since the very beginning, we said that the importance of the mechanisms was about solving the issue of the diversification of items that should enter in order to have a proper humanitarian response, and the quantity. So if the mechanism can consolidate a reliable system that will reassure all the parties, the Israeli and the Egyptians, about how this, the humanitarian nature of this consignment, and that will allow to increase the overall and arrival of commodities in not only in quantity but also in quality terms. That would be, I think, the success measure for the mechanism. I think that the USG CAG has focused a lot on building, the relations and the trust around the mechanism. The mechanism has been recently activated for Jordan and the maritime corridor. We are expecting it to be imminently also activated, fully activated for the Egyptian side. And for us is more than welcome as a mechanism in the moment where we will have an increase of delivery of assistance. The percentage of entry, so at times I wonder if I am able and effective in briefing you guys, because the major challenge we have had since the very beginning of this operation is that a humanitarian operation is not the result of one action, let's say truck entry, is the combination of multiple levels. So our ability, for example, to measure how much of what we need is intimately linked to the ability that we have to move and to bring in staff, bring in the equipment that staff needs to operate, and so on and so forth. So the reality is that in these 9 months of operation, we have progressively expanding our footprint. We are now, I think there are roughly 70 internationals that have entered. At the beginning, we were, 20. And we have increased, all of the UN agencies and partners have increased the number of national staff. So there has been a huge effort to move the dial. But the reality is that we are not where we should be. And so for me, telling you exactly what is the percentage of what enters where we should be is very challenging. Now I can tell you that, the colleagues from UNRWA were saying that they need 60 trucks of flour a day to enter. And you look at the numbers of trucks that are entering, we are not there. They've done very well in the past months. I think that, as I said earlier, the ZKIM operation, for example, is working well and meeting the basic needs of Gaza. But there are other parts that we are far away from where we should be. We have been asking for months the possibility to bring educational and recreational material for children. There are, 600,000 children that are out of schools. 50% of the population are minors. They deserve to be, taken care of. And maybe it's not life-saving in stricto sensu, is that they don't receive that, they will not die today. But the long-term damages on the social fabric of that situation of the children that cannot or do not have access to activities every day, or ideally, some resemblance of school, is gigantic, is enormous, and we cannot, just content ourselves to, counting the percentage of the truck, because otherwise it will really skew the analysis. The other element that we're moving forward progressively is the opening up to material that in the past was not allowed in. I know that the Israeli have been, doing some efforts to expand the list of material, and there's been a lot of diplomatic and political capital spent to advocate for bringing in pipes, bringing in some wash material that is essential to resume some essential services. And this is something that we need to keep on advocating. But the scale of the current level of interim assistance is, a drop in the ocean of what is required.
Thank you.
And other questions about the big picture and your experience in other war zones compared to Gaza?
Gaza starts with a unique situation. It's the only place in the world where people cannot find a safe refuge and can leave the front line. So we were talking the other day with some colleagues on security, and they say normally, the procedures we have are conceived to take the mitigation measure that allow us to go toward the front line. In Gaza, everywhere is a front line. There is no safe space. Everything is front line. And the fact that civilian population cannot go anywhere to find safety, because even within the safe area, there are bombardments. It's the major characteristic and unicity of this situation. And this is why the Secretary General keep on saying, we will stay and deliver, because there is no other place in the planet where, if we pull out, what happened to the rest of the population? The population cannot pull out. So the humanitarian community cannot pull out.
Thank you. Gabriel?
Hi, thank you for the briefing. Gabriel Elizondo from Al Jazeera English. You've answered most of my questions. Thank you for all your time. I just have two. I just want to clarify, when Israel orders these quote-unquote evacuations in the last few days, are they at all giving you a heads up and or coordinating in any way, shape, or form? And if they are not, why not? What is the reason that they're giving you for not? And then the second question is, I'll just ask you to step back a second. I know that Secretary General has said the UN is not leaving Gaza, but my question to you, sir, is how much longer can this go on, and how much longer at the current rate of this conflict can the humanitarian community in your role continue given the situation?
Thank you, Gabriel. It's as I said, we don't have options. We can't. There is the humanitarian imperatives for the way we have operated in many other contexts will never allow us to say we have to give up. What we have to do is to continue advocating and finding the political support and the diplomatic support to reach the place where, by doing this, we're not exposing our colleagues to the risk of their life. I was involved in the recovery of the colleagues that have been victim of the incidents on the 13th of April. And honestly, we shouldn't have any of that, as it is for the other 270 colleagues that have an aid worker that we've lost. So that's where there is a difficult red line to walk through. On the heads up from IDF, in this specific case, we did not receive. And actually, as I said earlier, when we were told later on the day that the evacuation order was not involved in the hospital, we told them, yeah, thank you, but it's a bit too late, because you should have told them earlier. I think that I'm not a military expert. I guess that there are military reasons why they cannot necessarily share information ahead of time. And basically, we saw it in social media. And so this is something that, again, particularly when it is impacting civilian critical services and civilian infrastructure, I think it's very important that we maintain and entertain a dialogue. But this is an ongoing conversation with Israeli that we will continue to have.
Thank you. We're just going to go to the screen, Abdelhamid, and then Bessan, and then Dawn, and we have to close it.
Thank you, Domenico, for the briefing. My name is Abdelhamid Sayam from Al-Quds Al-Arabi. I have a few also questions regarding the situation, and I want to ask you first about UNRWA. If it's still functioning, do you deal with it? Do they have people on the ground? Are they functioning in different parts of Gaza? And another question about the situation in the refugee camps in the West Bank. I mean, the situation, as far as I know and first-hand knowledge, there are some now difficulties, some maybe hunger in some of the refugee camps in the West Bank, if you can give us some information about it. And last time I asked you about child number 30 who died out of famine. Now I heard that child number 40 died of famine. So if you can also share some information about it. And I'm not sure if you can tell us more about the Guantanamo of Israel, which is the detention camp of Sdi Taiman between Gaza and Beersheba, and the situation of the detainees there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Abdelhamid, for the question. So UNRWA is present. The sheer number of people that they have, the 13,000 employees that they had before the war, part of them, not all of them, but part of them are really, they reinvented themselves because most of them were teachers actually. They reinvented themselves and they are part and parcel of the humanitarian operations. Also importantly, UNRWA has a presence, throughout the Gaza Strip, as you maybe know. That is very important because this allows us to piggyback on their infrastructure when we needed to operate. Give an example. The other day, my team went to Gaza City, and they were looking at the number of people that came out from Sujahia. And of course, the humanitarian mechanism normally goes through an assessment and then start delivering assistance, but we have to mobilize the cluster, the partners, and so on and so forth. And so we discussed with my team, and we decided, okay, the first thing we do is to go through the UNRWA infrastructure to distribute, emergency aid. Now, the initial things, some items, non-food items, blankets, and whatever was necessary, and some initial food, because these people have left with nothing. They need a minimum to be accommodated in a destroyed schools, because that's where they have gone. They moved into destroyed school inside Gaza City from Sujahia. So UNRWA remains a fundamental element of the response. I think also that the humanitarian community has progressively expanded their footprint. We're not where we should be, but because of all the constraints I described. And I think we should continue to make an effort to get there. Thank you for the question on the West Bank. Indeed, I didn't cover at all West Bank. And the situation in West Bank is critical, not only on the refugee camps. The situation in refugee camps is particularly critical because of all the military operations that are happening there. The legal framework of operations in the West Bank is a law enforcement, and what we see is methods and practice that are more closer to warfare. And we have seen all the damages to the infrastructure inside the camps, including to UNRWA facilities. And that's of greatest concern. But the situation in West Bank in general is complicated. As you know, the economy of West Bank is very much integrated with Israeli, and since the 7th of October, a lot of that is not happening anymore. So not only there is the issue of the revenue, but it is also all the issue of the economic exchange that were happening between Israel and West Bank. And there are thousands of jobs lost, thousands of business opportunities lost. And this situation is really concerning us because it could bring a deterioration of the situation to the point where you could have a serious further deterioration in the West Bank. Children dying of hunger. As I said earlier, and we discussed a lot with UNICEF colleagues, the only possibility for us to be specific and scientific in this, in reporting this, would be to have fully functioning operations. The reality that, apart from going to Kamal Adwan and trying to understand what is happening there, which is one of, as you know, one of the hospitals where these children are treated in the north, we do not have that capillary presence that allow us to monitor the entire situations. So again and again and again, we are appealing for having full and unimpeded access to scale up humanitarian operation. Then I will be able to, appropriately answer to your question. I'm sure the UNICEF colleagues are working on this, they are collecting this, but they themselves admit that they do not have the visibility of the entire situation, because not everybody can come to an hospital, as you know, unfortunately, given the situation of the hospital. And thank you also to remind the situation of the detentions. I think that there has been the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights have published and have done some studies on it. It's beyond the remit of OCHA, but for sure is one of the very concerning parts of the current situation, considering in particular that no one has had access to any detention center since the beginning of the war. And that, of course, and so we just get the accounts of those who are liberated and freed and released in Gaza, and those accounts are scaring and concerning, and really raise a lot of concerns about violation of basic human rights.
Thank you. Bissam, and then we'll close it off.
Thank you so much. Bisan Aboukwik with Al Jazeera Arabic. Just a quick question. You mentioned that you only got 35% of the funding that you have requested. Just two parts to this question. How important would it be to actually get the rest, despite all of the other challenges that have nothing to do with funding, security, and so forth in terms of aid operations in Gaza? And if you don't get the rest of this amount, how would that actually impede your operations in Gaza and aid delivery and everything else?
So I'll give a very clear example, I hope, to explain this. I said earlier that with the loss of EGH, the European Gaza Hospital, we lost the last CT scan available in Gaza. Some colleagues told me that there is one at Nasser once in a while it works, but it's not functioning every day, apparently. If we have to start thinking about re-establishing minimum decent conditions of basic services, like hospitals and health, of course, being a fundamental one, we need to align some equipment like this, CT scans, MRIs, and so on and so forth, in order to be ready the moment in which the constraints on our systems will be lifted, to bring them in and start again providing these services. And this is not something that if tomorrow you tell me you can bring it in, we can improvise. It takes, weeks, if not months. Some of this machinery is very complex, very expensive, and they need to go through procurement processes that takes that time. So for me is really, we have two elements of it. One is the immediate level of operation that has to be sustained, which I think is primarily what this 35% has been so far. But then we have also the rest that we have not been able, and that the rest that we have to be ready to deliver, that will have to be that we have to work on. So the impact will be really in moving a dial on this.
Andrea, thank you so much for taking quite a bit of time. We really appreciate it. We wish you and the team all the best, and I know we'll see you back here very soon. Take care.
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you all.
Ciao.
Bye. Ciao.